Hi, everybody. My name is Anna, and I am part of the Manage Engine team. We're very excited to have Troy Dumoulin here, VP of R&D at Pink Elephant. He will be presenting how high-velocity organizations enable resilience and anti-fragility. Now to you, Troy.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be with you guys again. Yeah, so this is an interesting topic. We're going to be talking today about the concept of moving from mean time to repair or quick, service restoration beyond that to building an organization that has resilience and ultimately anti-fragility. So the conversation we're going to have along the agenda here is we're going to focus on the why first. It's always good to start with the why first. Why do we need such a high velocity operating model? And then we're going to talk about how that ties into digital transformation, because that's a key driver. We're going to be introducing to you a key publication out of the ITIL specialists in intermediate level called Highvelocity IT. And we'll talk about the 5 objectives for a high velocity organization. It's not just about speed to market. There's a few other objectives you're going to have to meet at the same time. And then we're going to think about how we move from this quick to respond to resilience and ultimately anti-fragility. And we'll unpack that word and its meaning a little bit more for you as we go through this session. Starting with the why. So when we think about value, value in the context of the perception of value always is from the eyes of the consumer. All right, it starts from the voice of customer. It's the perceived benefits, usefulness, or importance of something. And that's a critical thing to start with. It's an outside-in premise. There are 3 dimensions, though, when it comes to am I delivering value or not? And the first dimension is the traditional sense of quality. The quality word is simply meaning, does the product, the service deliver the function, the feature, and also the non-functional requirements. That's, does it do the thing I expect? Is it fit for purpose? But it also has to have the availability, the reliability, the security, the fit for use, and that's the non-functional. So that's traditional quality, fit for purpose, fit for use. But there's another 2 dimensions. One is cost. I have to be able to ascribe the economic value, because value always comes in the context of, well, I'm giving you some revenue, whether I'm filling up your budget at the end of the year, or I'm putting an invoice on the table and I'm paying it. I'm always receiving value, I'm always receiving revenue for the value delivered. The challenge is when the sense of value is where the revenue that you're receiving is somehow deemed to be less than the output and outcome that's being achieved. All right, so that's the cost element, right? I have to feel like I'm getting a good deal. But the 3rd dimension of value comes down to this visual here, speed. So first quality, then cost, now speed. This visual represents a classic dilemma for the service provider organization. And it speaks about 2 dimensions here. On the left, we see the rate of demand. That's the rate at which you're getting request and or demand from a customer organization. You could think about that as the red arrow coming through this graph. And then there's the rate of supply. And that's the speed at which you, the service provider, is able to move work from the point of request to value realization. It goes into the hands of the consumer who has asked for it. Now, the challenge is when these 2 things become mismatched. So the red line relates to a typical demand pattern. As organizations have increasingly digitized their operating model, you would expect the red line to grow. Demand would increase as we do more and more digital automation. But as you can see, it often happens where there's this kind of hockey curve or kind of an enhanced now rate of demand. The challenge comes with the green line, which is the representative line of the ability to supply. At one point in distant history, you might remember that the IT service capability of delivery maybe was even faster than the rate of demand. You know when this was good because you basically kept up. You didn't feel like you finished every day where there was more work coming in than you could possibly do in a given period of time. However, that might be for many of you a long time ago. For a while, we kept up. We didn't keep up by improving efficiency. We just threw more energy at it. Maybe we hired more people. Maybe at the end of the, the hire new people opportunity, we started to volunteer our additional time, our discretionary non-paid time. So we end up, working late evenings and doing our email at 10 o'clock at night, or, working most weekends. And so for a while, we kept up by simply adding more time. And we thank you for your service, by the way. But the reality is that does come to an end because you can't make more time. So we get to this now challenge where we have, as you can see on the graph, this intersection between the rate of demand continuing to grow and our ability to supply kind of leveling off and maybe even decreasing. This introduces a world of risk into context. There's the risk to the consumer, the customer, because they need to achieve a certain goal, objective, or mission. They might be in a competitive scenario, and if they can't keep up, there's a wolf at the door. And so they're desperate to basically maintain their pace. But it's also a risk to the supplier, because if you are not able to hit the speed dimension of value, that's the third dimension, quality, cost, and speed, we now begin to see a very big challenge with the trust, the integrity, the satisfaction aspects of the service consumer and provider relationship. In fact, think about it this way. You're a consumer, right? You have maybe you're driving a car and you've got to get to work, and that car needs to be fixed because you have this kind of pulsing engine light going on, and you call up your trusted mechanic and you say, "Hey, Joe, can you help me out? My car's broken." And Joe says, "I'd love to help you out, Troy, but how about 3 weeks from now?" Ask yourself, what would you have to do at that point? You're going to have to find an alternative supplier, right? You're going to have to agree to see other people. And that's what, in essence, shadow IT is, where our service consumer just can't wait for us any longer. And they go out and they basically do it for themselves, or they grab a credit card and they buy it themselves. And we call it shadow IT, but I call it loss of market share. Okay, when you've hit this situation, it's time for transformation. In fact, let's imagine you're struggling on all three dimensions of value, right? You can't really answer the feature and the non-functional conversation. You're challenged with rationalizing or at least justifying your cost relative to competitive alternatives, and you're not keeping up with the speed dimension. Did you want a job, right? Because now the question is your ability to actually supply on expectation, meet customer demand is highly suspect at this point. Something has to change. What took us this far simply can't take us further. So the word transformation gets thrown around a lot. So let's talk about that word transformation. So digital transformation, a much hyped and often talked about term in our world, really describes a point in time where the organization has to work differently. We have to leverage, ideally, digital technology to not just keep up, but to leapfrog our competitors, right? So everyone's using digital technology. It's whether you're using it strategically to take advantage to build competitive advantage, right? So, the taxi company and the ride sharing company are both using digital technology, but one is using it simply to pay bills. The other one's using it to create a completely new business model. So it's not just about using digital technology to, increase speed and velocity. It's about doing so to take advantage, strategic advantage. So it's about doing things differently or doing completely different things with this new digital enablement. It's about reframing the way you've always done work. So it's always been that way. Well, it is what it is. Doesn't last very long when you're basically trying to survive as an organization. That's a quick way to say, sayonara, so long, and thanks for all the fish. The reality is I have to think about doing work differently, which means my investment strategy has to think about different approaches, whether that's different approaches to digital automation, software that I'm using for remote collaboration or self-service, whether that's how we collaborate better as teams, how we integrate partners in an improved way. All of it means I've got to do something different. I have to pick up my velocity. I have to increase the speed aspect, if not all three aspects of the value conversation. So this is a perfect segue into this new ITIL 4 book called High-Velocity IT. It talks about what are the requirements, what are the means by which we take advantage of technical practices to increase velocity, what are the management, classic service management practices that we have to focus on, and how might they have to modify or change to increase the ability to hit all three dimensions of value. So as you can see, high velocity IT is defined as the application of this digital technology for significant business enablement, not just to keep up, but to thrive, survive, and to leapfrog our competitive environment. But, and there's a note there, it's not just about let's code faster, let's do faster development. We're going to talk about 5 objectives of a high velocity organization, and represented in this book, which I love, by the way. It's one of my favorite classes to teach. So it all comes down to the value chain. So this is the ITIL 4 value chain, and it represents a series of macro activities that any service organization has to basically engage in to deliver value. Because if you think about it, we're a value chain. On the left, I have demand. We talked about that I'm receiving from our customer, or I'm the trusted partner that's saying it's not just about capturing demand, but you expect me as well to put great ideas on the table. So you want me to present opportunities. Hey, this is really cool digital technology. We think we should use this. It would allow us to achieve mission in a greater and a more efficient way. What do you think? Right? So it's a bi-directional. It's not just a catcher's mitt for demand capture. But once I capture, or I incent demand, I have to get through that whole set of activities at speed. And it's going to increase the need to operate in a collaborative way between people who are focused on engage, people who are in the white ivory tower thinking about planning and strategy and architecture and financial resourcing, people who think about design, obtain, build, deliver, support, improve. You think about that, that really represents macro capabilities of your organization. Now, the question is whether they either collaborate well or not. So to build velocity, by the way, the term velocity is different than just speed. Velocity, if you want to go look it up, is defined by speed with direction. If you thought about every one of these boxes as kind of a major area of your organization based on specialization or capability, for the organization that would be working through these activities, to build velocity, they would have to share the same values, the same beliefs, the same practices, and the same base prioritization of work. And if they didn't, and they all believed that it was more important to have individual truth versus shared truth, you would have nothing in the context of velocity because everyone would be going their own direction. Right? So we have to think about this in the context of improving flow or velocity through this, which brings us to how we're going to achieve it. So it's not just, here's my value chain. There are a couple of things I'm going to have to basically enable in my operating model, my ability to work as a team based on these shared capabilities. These are the 3 core things that you would have to be good at to create velocity. First, fast flow. How do I go from demand to receipt and realization of value as quickly as possible? How do I get through that previous value chain? And that's going to be around things like shared practices, shared automation, right? Shared policy, shared priority. So I have to build this sense of we the people find something self-evident and true, and we're going to share these things, including shared tooling and automation. So that's a critical success factor. Now, the reality also is that because we live in a complex adaptive system, it's constantly changing. I have to be situationally aware of how things are changing, and do I need to pivot? The principle of agility. Right? So we talk about feedback loops, but we need shorter feedback loops to discover that things have completely changed on us in the last 30 minutes. And so fast feedback loops allows me, and this is key, to also adjust for fast improvement. I can't just focus on deliver, deliver, deliver. If there's a bottleneck, a constraint, or a challenge, or an organizational, cultural issue that I'm facing, I have to deal with my technical and people debt. I have to do that quickly. Otherwise, I'm going to get myself into a situation where I will basically drown in unlooked after issues that need continual improvement. All three things are going to be critical for high velocity. So I said earlier, and you saw on the slide that, so you want to get, high velocity going. It's more than just fast development, though that is one of the objectives on the slide. Let's start with this first one on the top left, valuable investments. So you got all this incoming demand. You might be a shared services function and you're looking at now multiple sources of demand, which seem to be in conflict, and there seems to be challenges about shared priority. I have to be able to rapidly get to a sense of portfolio investment alignment and prioritization. So it's coming in. I need to figure out how to aggregate it, how to coordinate it, how to prioritize it. And it's not going to be just me doing this, because we're co-creating value, not doing it to them, right? We're going to talk about doing it with them. So valuable investments, tee them up, prioritize them, and decide on our portfolio. What are we going to invest in? We're not investing in right now. What are we going to hold the line on? What are we going to de-invest in and retire relative to legacy or technical debt reduction? So once I get that going quickly, okay, now I got to go from A to Z, A to Z, depending on where you're from. I have to go through the value chain at speed. We're talking fast development, but it's not just software coding. There's engagement, there's planning, there's design, there's coding or buying and configuring. Then there's moving into production. Value isn't realized until it's all the way through. It's not just about the obtain and build part of the value chain. But let's imagine we get fast flow, right? That was one of the goals. The reality about complex adaptive systems is that they're also always going to break. All right. The nature of complex adaptive systems is that you cannot remove 100% error. So there's going to be disruption. There's going to be service outages. So not only is it important to build speed to market with my fast development and fast valuable investments, I also have to be able to, if it breaks, return it to normal as quickly as possible. This is the ability to bounce back. And this is really the definition of resiliency we'll see in a moment. It's down. How do I return to normal? How do I go back to a previous steady state? How do I improve my mean time to repair or speed to restore service? Because I get great fast development, it's out in the market, but it's broken all the time, right? When it breaks, it stays broken for a period of time. And so no one's trusting the availability, the reliability, or the performance aspects. Remember, back to my quality dimension. Quality wasn't just that it's there. Quality also is that the non-functional requirements of high availability and reliability also exist. Now, two last dimensions. You see, build it and they will come only works in Hollywood. If you say, I got a great idea, let's put this to market, and I'm sure people are going to love it and buy it, without understanding your market, without designing the thing you're going to be providing in collaboration and cooperation with your customer, you could build it and they won't come. In fact, they may even resent that you didn't ask, right? So you have a choice. You can either do it to them or with them. I can guarantee you, though it might take a little bit more time, doing it with them, co-created value, is going to be a higher degree of success for you. Final one is, okay, we're going fast. We're getting fast flow, fast feedback, and even fast improvement. We can't forget that part of the quality conversation is the non-functional requirements around compliance, regulation. So we have a shared conformance. So we have our brothers and sisters in the world of risk, audit, and compliance, and they have a job to protect and to secure. And we can either build that into the whole value chain, or the alternative is that they're at the point of go live and they've got their reams of checklists and they've said, nope, no one's going any further until you can dot all the I's and cross all the T's, which is of course going to slow things down, right? So you have a choice. You can either operate in that form where they're literally slowing down the flow, or you embed the assurance criteria into every stage of the value chain, which is a much higher predictor of velocity. So you want to be a high velocity organization. Congratulations, that's a wonderful thing, especially if you're struggling with the value conversation that I mentioned earlier. You have to hit all 5 of these objectives to do so effectively. Now, it's not just about, making sure our practices and processes are efficient. There's a world of technical practice that's evolving, disruptive technologies, new ways of doing things, that is evolving. A lot of it's using, third-party cloud-based technologies, software as a service, and we're seeing artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all of these kind of cool kid words on the left here, Google's SRE, chat ops. These are all major contributors to building velocity through the value chain, and we need to leverage them because they are awesome tools for creating velocity. The point I want to make, though, is that those technical techniques and practices are actually automating and enabling the classic things we have on the right. So these aren't replacing them, they're creating automation for our traditional capabilities as an IT service provider. We just have to modify both of them to work together. So we're using chatbots and artificial intelligence and machine learning to support incident and problem management, or monitoring and event management, right? So we need to think about marrying these two together, not saying, well, we have all these great tools now, so we don't need anything on the right. Nothing could be farther from the truth. These things have to come together. We have to be able to think about them collectively. So the kind of theme of this webinar was moving from this ability to respond quickly, going from it's broken, it's now restored, thinking about production support or classic break fix incident management, right? That's what we could describe as detect and respond. And there's a huge amount of improvement we can make in there. We can increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of our service desk. We can enable high levels of automation between monitoring an event and self-healing on the technical side. We can begin to think about how do we improve prioritization and improve the classic production support practices. That's getting better at getting it back up and running. But that doesn't mean that I've built resilience. It's just meaning that I'm shortening the length of time between detect and I've responded and restored. Resilience is going to be the means to respond, but also resist the service disruption, thinking about architectural fault tolerance or resilience, or if it does fail, the ability to fall back quickly in an automated means, whether we're using deployment techniques like canary releases or blue-green, which means the ability to kind of revert back to steady states in a matter of seconds, if not minutes. And this is going to increase our resilience. But it's not enough to be able to bounce back quickly. If we're constantly bouncing back, but not learning from our failures, then you can't really articulate that we've grown stronger from, we've built knowledge around. So anti-fragility means to go beyond resilience to growth and learning, right? It's to become a learning organization that's adaptive and constantly changing in response to the situation we're seeing in the detect and respond resilience steps. So thinking about anti-fragility, it's quite a cool kid word. The DevOps movement is really excited about the concept. A lot of the original kind of thinking around this comes from a great book called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And the concept of anti-fragility is different than being robust. it's to learn from, as I've mentioned. The best scenario or analogy that I think about as anti-fragility, getting stronger through disruption and error and outage, is the classic story of Hercules and the 7 trials when he's fighting the Hydra, right? The 7-headed Hydra. And if you remember the story, or if you've not heard the story, what happens is Hercules comes up with his weapon and he cuts off a head, and immediately 2 more grow back. So, cutting off the head is not the best way to deal with the Hydra, because the Hydra is very anti-fragile. It becomes stronger the more disruption that it actually experiences. So that, in essence, what the principle of anti-fragility is, to not just get faster at response, but to grow stronger through it, right? Stronger through adversity. And so that's what we're going to talk about. That's kind of the ultimate stage of becoming a learning organization. So to kind of now put this in context, I've kind of summarized this verbally, but here you see it on the slide. So to detect and respond means the ability to respond effectively. I'm on it, let's restore it. Resilience, the means to respond, but also resist and to bounce back when it does fail. Speed to restore. Anti-fragility, not only to respond, but to learn, to become proactive and adaptive. So these would be ITIL management practices, which would basically come back to support this. So detect and respond typically kind of resolves around these three management practices. There's normal incident management. And so that's your, comes in at the service desk or is detected at a network operations center, and someone says, I got this, I'm on it, and we restore service. We might have to escalate it a couple of levels, but this is normal incident management. It's something that we're all very familiar with. We're also very familiar with the concept of major incident management, but it's still detect and respond. At some point, we realize that it's the most important thing in front of us. So everybody drops what they're doing. They swarm the issue, right? And they get on a call bridge, or they go into a conference center, a war room, and they basically all work the problem until they've got it solved. Still detect and respond. There's even a sense of disaster recovery, which is a sub-element of service continuity, which is another level of detect and respond. In fact, you can think about these as three levels. Normal can become a major, but at what point does a major incident basically run out of time and I haven't resolved it? And I now have to revert to even a higher level of detect and respond and to fall over to my continuity environment, right? And so that disaster recovery plan is executed. And the key about being good at detect and respond isn't just being good at each of these things individually, but recognizing that they're needing to be integrated and that one could become the other. And there are thresholds between normal to major. We usually got that one covered, but it's also this threshold between major to disaster or crisis. That's not always as well defined. What is that? What's the amount of time we can wait? Who makes a decision to trigger our continuity approach? We need to be good at this, but this is basic table stakes. This is still detect and respond. Let's move on to resilience. So resilience, again, bounce back, right? So release and deployment management. I'm looking at coordinating and orchestrating my releases and my deployment to production. There's techniques, I've mentioned a few already. Let's deploy this in a smaller chunk so that we can kind of be aware of its impact and test it easier. Let's use a canary approach where I'm deploying to 2 out of 5 load balance servers. I make sure that the 2 doesn't, the 2 that I've just deployed it to don't break and I haven't had an issue. I roll it out to the rest. I'm using the blue-green where I have two states. One's an active and one's a passive state, but both represent my production environment. I deploy to my passive state, deploy, and then I release, which is to make available these now deployments to the consumer. I've released it by making the passive active. And if for some reason some disruption happens, the ability to bounce back is simply as fast as making the current active the passive again and reverting back, right? So these would be strategies around release and deployment management supporting resilience. Service configuration management. So configuration can mean a couple of different things for different audiences. It could be the verb to configure, and I'm going to configure only using standard artifacts, standard scripts, standard environments. But it's also the concept of what is my standard configuration and what should my configuration be. So I have to be able to test two things. Let's imagine my monitoring tool, right, discovers a current state of a device. And I compare it to a standard in my configuration management database. So I have to be able to compare the actual, which I've discovered, against the target state, what it should be. And I need to be able to compare those two states to understand whether there's variance. Has there been configuration drift? And the ability to basically measure the difference between target and current state would allow me to trigger possibly a realignment of the actual with the intended state. And so a big word called idempotence describes the ability to reset my environment based on this standard configuration. Can't do that without knowing my standard configuration or target state configuration. Change enablement. Change enablement, one of the things that we look for to say, you're good to go, you're authorized to actually go forward and make the change, would be a tested backout strategy, right? So first of all, the change needs to demonstrate it can be backed out before I approve it. And if so, right, the backout strategy would allow me to recover back to previous state in a rapid way. So these are just a few examples, and not the only examples, of management practices which would be critical to support resilience, the ability to bounce back, to restore service, and to do so quickly. Resilience is great. Ideal is anti-fragility. That's our kind of up level of the resilience conversation. So a couple of things that support anti-fragility. Well, let's talk about agile shift left testing. So the premise of shift left testing is that I test as close to the build as possible to detect as early as possible whether I have a defect. The kind of way we describe that is fail fast. It's not let's fail fast, let's discover we failed faster. In fact, test-driven development, which is a principle of extreme agile, says let's write our testing script before we even write the code. And then we write the code to support the test, and then we improve our test coverage. And if I'm detecting early that I've got errors in my code, I'm going to adjust, right? I'm going to learn. And so agile shift left testing is a critical practice for anti-fragility and learning and adapting and becoming stronger. Problem management. Think about what problem management is supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be recognizing patterns of behavior and getting stronger from it, right? So I see all these incidents around a certain product and or service over a period of time, and I say, hey, Houston, I might have a problem. So we begin to investigate whether there's a systemic instability that I need to address and say, well, yeah, there is a problem here. And I need to identify not just a temporary workaround, but a permanent fix that will eliminate that problem and reduce or remove the reoccurring incidents. I've just gotten stronger, right? So that's a critical success factor, effective problem management to become a learning organization. Knowledge management. It goes without saying, the old saying, those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it, right? So if we don't have good knowledge management, which captures, shapes, updates, improves knowledge, and makes it available at the right time in the right moment, we do forget our past. And we're doomed to continually repeat the same things over and over again. So critical success factor to becoming a learning organization is to have some decent practice and maturity around knowledge management. Now, the challenge in my personal experience is that many of these practices are fairly low maturity. And that's the tragedy here. But the goal, because we have the means, we know how to achieve that, taking both the technical approaches we've discussed, like blue green or canary or AI ops or machine learning, and marrying that together with these management practices, collectively that allows us to kind of move from break fix, detect and respond, resilience, and ultimately anti-fragility. So hopefully this has been an interesting webinar and topic for you folks. And fight the good fight. And I wish you best wishes on your journey. from moving from reactive to proactive, from this concept of, mean time to restore to becoming a learning organization. So good luck and best wishes on your ITSM journeys. Thank you.